Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. These are our top headlines. Impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has survived another day outside prison walls. Investigators abandoned their attempt to arrest him, citing safety concerns. For the first time since Bashar al-Assad's ouster, Germany and France's foreign ministers are in Damascus, meeting the country's new leader as terrorism tops Western concerns. And Elon Musk is slamming UK lawmakers over child grooming gang scandals, and in response, he's been told to mind his own business. To our top story now. After a tense 6-hour standoff, South Korean police abandoned their attempt to arrest suspended President Yoon Suk Yeol. The 150 officers were overwhelmed by a large crowd of pro-Yoon supporters outside and a barrier of security staff inside the residence.
자신들의 권한을 유지하기에 혈안이 되어 있습니다. 지킬 수 있으리라 기대했습니다. 식민지배를 절폐하기 위해 나섰던 1차 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 경호처 비켜라! 경호처!
Meanwhile, under South Korean law, anyone can make an arrest to prevent a crime. Critics now accuse Yoon of inciting his supporters to block his detention, drawing parallels to Donald Trump's January the 6th Capitol riot. Supporters of the impeached president were seen on the streets adopting "Stop the Steal" slogans made popular by Trump's followers back in 2021, hoping the incoming US president will aid their embattled leader. This is the first time a sitting president in South Korea has ever faced arrest. On the streets of Seoul, opinions are pretty much divided. Some support Yoon's arrest and some believe it's constitutional.
I came rushing out to this place filled with anger over the fact that Yoon Suk Yeol has not been swiftly arrested and that they are resisting and not promptly complying with the arrest. I feel extremely frustrated as the current state of rebellion has psychologically demoralized the people. The thought that this situation might continue for a prolonged period leaves me with a deep sense of gloom.
Ever since the warrant was issued, I have been anxiously waiting for it to be executed. This morning, when I heard that the Corruption Investigation Office had set out, I fervently hoped that he would finally be arrested. However, on my way here, I heard that the office had withdrawn, and I felt utterly disheartened and furious, with no way to express my frustration.
I could not suppress the frustration and anger I felt today, seeing how the Corruption and Investigation Office for higher-ranking officials issued an illegal arrest warrant and acted as if it was above the Constitution, and tried to humiliate and oust the legitimately elected president, which was chosen by the people. So I set aside my work today, thinking about how to prevent this country from heading toward communism.
For more on this, I'm joined by the former British ambassador to North Korea, John Everard. John, thank you so much for joining us again. It appears Yoon Suk Yeol is ready to keep defying anti-corruption officials. Can you give us an update on the events that unfolded today in South Korea?
Yes, most of it was covered by the very competent footage you've just shown your viewers. A group of officers from the Corruption Investigation Office arrived at the president's residence at about 8 o'clock Seoul time this morning. They couldn't get anywhere near the residence. They were blocked by supporters and by a unit of the military that is tasked with protecting the president. They upped the numbers to 80 officers and fired to 150. And on the third attempt, a group of officers and investigators were actually allowed into the residence, only to be read a statement by Yoon's lawyers saying that the warrant was illegal and effectively that the president had no intention of complying with it. You have to remember that Yoon Suk Yeol, before he became president, was a chief state prosecutor. He knows these laws inside out, and he knows all the loopholes. I think we can be fairly sure he will fight to the last.
The situation is actually quite complex because he has a warrant out for his arrest, as we just outlined, but he's also protected by these guards. The authorities pretty much unable to arrest him. Why are guards preventing the arrest warrant to be issued by the court? You know, why is he being protected by them in many sense, John?
Because although he has been impeached by the National Assembly, of course, the impeachment has yet to be ruled on by the Constitutional Court, he remains head of the armed forces. He's commander-in-chief. And quite properly, both the soldiers at the residence and the presidential guard take their instructions from him, not from the acting president, Chan Sam-hyok. So they were simply doing what they were told. And they put out a statement to that effect. They were complying with their constitutional obligations, they said. This also means that as and when the Constitutional Court finally delivers a verdict on his impeachment, if it upholds the impeachment, then the oath of loyalty of those soldiers, of those officers to President Yoon Suk Yeol simply ceases to operate, and they will fade away. And I think at that point, he will see the writing on the wall and come away quietly.
The warrant for his arrest expires actually on Monday, so those determined to see him detained will have to think pretty quick and pretty fast on their feet. Do you think authorities will try and execute the arrest warrant again, or do you think they'll wait for the impeachment to go through the courts, as you just outlined?
Personally, I think they might try for a new warrant. Probably not immediately. Also, you have to remember, this is South Korea. Things are never quite as they seem. And I'm left wondering whether those officers actually seriously expected to walk away from that building with Yoon Suk Yeol in detention. You see, I suspect that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiation going on, trying to persuade President Yoon to resign, which, of course, would cut through all the complexities of the impeachment process in return for probably safe passage out of the country. And I think a lot of what happened today was the current authorities just showing some of their cards, reminding him that they do have the power to charge him with insurrection, which in theory even carries the death penalty. It would certainly mean a long period in prison if he's convicted of it. And they were effectively saying, President Yoon, do you really want this? Would you not prefer just to fade away and enjoy a comfortable retirement somewhere?
You've just outlined those things, and in a sense, is this a real breakdown of law and order in South Korea?
No. The crisis was 3rd December. There was a nasty moment when Yoon Suk Yeol declared martial law. But that was over within a matter of hours. The National Assembly struck the martial law decree down. What we've been seeing since then has been the South Korean constitution working. There's been quite a lot of grinding noises, and not everything has worked as smoothly as one might have hoped. But there's a definite process, or rather processes, involved here. Everybody knows what the rules are, and they will eventually deliver a solution, possibly quite quickly. Remember that the impeachment trial has already started. It started last Friday, and nobody knows how long the Constitutional Court will take to deliver a verdict. But it may be that we see something fairly soon, or it may be several weeks. Whatever. When the Constitutional Court finally decides whether or not the impeachment was valid, then we have a clear situation and South Korea moves forward.
John Everard, the former British ambassador to North Korea, thank you so much for joining me with your insights this evening. Let's turn to Syria, where there has been a flurry of diplomatic visits as the war-torn country seeks to rebuild and find its place in the ever-changing world order. Germany's top diplomat, Annalena Baerbock, and her French counterpart, Jean-Noël Barrot, met the new Syrian leader, Ahmed al-sharaa, in Damascus. The pair are the first EU diplomats to visit Syria since Bashar al-Assad's ouster. Now, staying with that visit, political transition seems to be the key word for the diplomats who toured the notorious Sednaya prison, a remnant of the pain and suffering under the Assad regime. Germany's Baerbock talking to social media, saying that there are expectations on the new Syrian leaders to give every ethnic and religious group a place in the political process, adding that the visit is a clear signal that a new political beginning between Europe and Syria is now possible. One of the primary concerns in the West is the resurgence of terrorist groups like ISIS, an offshoot of al-Sharaa's HTS. Speaking at a meeting in Damascus, France's Barrat emphasized the need to quash terrorism and also maintain security.
A sovereign and secure Syria cannot leave any place for Islamist terrorism. Terrorism has struck you. Terrorism has struck us in our flesh. That's why we fought side by side alongside the Kurds in the northwest of Syria against Islamist terrorism. We struck again on December 31, just a few days ago, a position of Daesh, because we do not accept that a resurgence of Islamist terrorism can come to compromise the recovery of Syria and threaten the security of France and Europe.
For more on this, our correspondent Ross Cullen joins us now from Paris. Ross, good evening to you. Firstly, what was the purpose of this trip?
Well, good evening, Leigh-Ann. This is the next level of these visits that we've seen. We've seen the diplomats go in the first instance at a lower level. Now we've seen that to ministerial level with Annalena Baerbock and Jean-Noël Barrot going on this joint trip, Franco-German joint visits to Damascus. The purpose to show that there is support if the HTS rebel group, if the de facto leadership of Syria could continue on a path of unity, can continue to try to unite the country, could continue to try to show that they are doing away with the worst excesses of the Assad regime, that there is support from the Western allies for continued engagement, continued mediation, continued negotiation with the terror group to understand if they are going to be continued proscribed or if they're going to be removed from that list. France and Germany, key members of the United Nations, key members of the European Union, and that is still proscribed a terror group on that list. So they want to have these face-to-face conversations, Leigh-Ann, in person with people like Ahmed al-Sharaa to understand his policies and his projections and objectives for what he wants to achieve for Syria in this coming year.
Yes, indeed, Ross. But what did the foreign minister say? The German minister made it clear Europe will not fund Islamist structures.
Yeah, Annalena Baerbock has said that there needs to be moderation and understanding. She did, and I quote, say there needs to be an avoidance of the acts of vengeance against different groups within the population. Ahmed al-Sharaa has said that he wants to ensure that Syria going forward is a Syria that welcomes all of its different sects, that there are no acts of retaliation against any particular part of the population. Syria made up of such a mix of different religions and different denominations within those religions as well. Of course, that ethnic mix as well is important to the overall understanding of Syria demographically. She did say that she wants to help Syria become a functioning state with full control over its territory. And turning to her French counterpart here, there was a cabinet meeting here in France today, but Jean-Noël Barrot not attending that because he was in Damascus with his German counterpart. He said that he wants to see a sovereign, stable and peaceful Syria, saying that France will be standing alongside the Syrian people in all their diversity to support a peaceful transition that guarantees the rights of all Syrians.
Ross, how might we see European policy towards Syria develop heading into this year?
Well, we need to understand in terms of the lists of proscribed terror organisations. Now, the European Union generally follows the United Nations in terms of its specific lists for which organisations should be prescribed, which ones should be sanctioned, which ones should be permitted to operate. And we have seen some moves over the last couple of weeks from the United Nations saying that they have recognised that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the de facto leadership of Syria, have made messages of goodwill. They have broadcast messages of unity and inclusiveness, and the United Nations will be looking very closely at whether it needs to maintain HTS on its list of outlawed organisations or whether it needs to permit it to function, and the European Union, Leigh-Ann, very likely to follow the position of the United Nations on that. Also, what we should watch very closely going forward are the links to Russia's war in Ukraine. Now, the European Union has been trying to undermine Russia diplomatically, financially, and of course militarily on the battlefield in Ukraine, giving support to Kiev and the Ukrainian armed forces. The European Union will also want to see a reduction of Russia's influence in Syria. One way that Annalena Baerbock has suggested that could be achieved is by the closure of Russian bases within Syria. They have an air base, Khmeimim, in the north, and they have a naval base, Tartus, on the coast of the Mediterranean. And so she and other Western allies would like to see the closure of those bases to reduce Russian influence in the region. However, we have also heard noises coming from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham that they would like to maintain some form of relationship with Russia, despite the fact that the Kremlin were the biggest backers of the now ousted Assad regime, and the former first family, Bashar al-Assad, his wife Asma, and their children are now believed to be physically present in Moscow. Despite that, we have also heard HTS saying they want to maintain a relationship with Moscow. Overall, it would be worth watching this year, Leigh-Ann, for the next level in terms of the visits. We've seen the diplomats, we've seen the foreign ministers. Will we see a German chancellor, a French president, perhaps an Italian prime minister arriving on the ground in Syria? There needs to be much more work done before that can happen, though, to understand the position of HTS going forward. We know the German foreign minister has called for elections as soon as possible. We know that HTS has said it will take 3 to 4 years for those to happen. So a lot of water needs to pass under the bridge, but we are seeing these movements bit by bit, a more formalisation of the relationship between Brussels, the wider European Union, and Syria.
Well, Ross, as soon as the presidents do go out and visit, you'll have to come back and tell us all about it. Ross Cullen, our correspondent in Paris, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, al-sharaa, speaking to Al-Arabiya last week, has signalled inclusivity along drafting a new constitution, taking a population census and holding elections. More recently, during the Syrian foreign minister's first visit, Assad Hassan al-Shaibani has told Saudi officials in Riyadh that the new leadership wants to set up government involving all parts of Syrian society. Now over to the UK, where the government are currently dealing with a scandal involving child grooming gangs. The Labour government is under fire after refusing calls to hold an inquiry into historic sexual abuse by grooming gangs in Oldham. Tech billionaire Elon Musk, known for his outspoken views, has now weighed in on the debate. Musk, after angering the German government by endorsing the far-right AfD party, is now upsetting British MPs by accusing the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, of failing to bring rape gangs to justice when he led the Public Prosecution Service. Musk describes Starmer as two-tier Keir, claiming there was no justice for violent crimes but prison for social media posts. He also slammed Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips, saying that she deserves to be in prison for blocking those grooming gangs. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, also responded to Musk, stating that some of his comments were misinformed and urging the tech mogul to roll up his sleeves and assist the government in tackling online child abuse. Responding to Musk, the UK Public Health Minister, Andrew Gwynn, also hit back by saying that the tech billionaire should focus on issues on the other side of the Atlantic. For more on this, our reporter Olly Barrat joins me now from London. Olly, a pleasure to have you this evening. Firstly, can you explain for us some background on this current scandal on Rotherham and the grooming gangs and how the current Prime Minister Keir Starmer is actually connected to all of this?
Well, it's quite a long story. There have been a series of scandals in this country, in a series of English towns in the north and the Midlands and the southwest of England, in which over a number of years it emerged that there were so-called grooming gangs or rape gangs, which had been grooming young girls and women and effectively sexually abusing many hundreds of them over a period of a number of years. And in some of these locations, it turned out that the victims were largely white young women and girls, and the people carrying out these crimes were often gangs made up of largely British Pakistani men. Now, over a number of years, as these scandals came out, there were sometimes criticisms of Keir Starmer when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions in this country in a former role before he became a politician. At the time, he recognised that some of the ways in which some of these crimes were investigated and prosecuted had not been up to scratch. Indeed, some of the inquiries into these episodes did talk about a political correctness affecting the ability and the likelihood of some authorities in wanting to investigate some of these crimes, given some of the allegations were revolving around the ethnicity of some of the perpetrators of these crimes. Now he's in government. Clearly, as Prime Minister, he's also coming under pressure because of the safeguarding minister's decision back in October not to launch a full public inquiry into some of the crimes that unfolded in the town of Oldham. And so he's connected very much in a present sense, but also in an historic sense to some of these crimes that were perpetrated, as I say, in a series of English towns over a number of years.
Olly, as I mentioned earlier, the Labour Party have refused to hold an inquiry. Can you just tell me why they have chosen to make this decision?
There was a call from the Oldham local authorities back in July to the new government to organise a public inquiry into grooming gangs in Oldham. Now, Jess Phillips responded in October, and she said that she didn't think it was right for the government to support a full public inquiry into what had happened in Oldham. But she wasn't saying that was because there shouldn't be any inquiry at all. She was suggesting that Oldham local authorities, the local council there, should organise it themselves. And she also pointed to the fact that there have been a series of inquiries into some of these specific issues in different towns and cities in England. And there was an overarching UK inquiry into child sexual abuse back in 2022, which also looked into some of these issues. So she wasn't ruling out all and any inquiries into these issues, or indeed that the government should act on some of the inquiry recommendations that have been handed down in past inquiries. But that has emerged as a controversial issue now, with the government under significant pressure to go ahead and say that there should be public backing from the central government in London for an inquiry into what took place in Oldham. That's really where this latest round of controversy developed from.
Elon Musk has weighed in on the debate. What has been the impact of his intervention on both the media coverage and on the politicians involved?
Well, one impact is that it's really fired up the debate around this story again. It's fired up scrutiny around this story again, on the media, on police forces, on local authorities, on social care services, and on politicians from several major parties here in the UK who have been responsible at different times in different parts of the country for looking into some of these issues. The other thing it's done is raised concerns around the relationship between the UK UK government and the incoming Trump administration, given that Elon Musk appears to be set to be a key part of that Trump administration. In recent days, Elon Musk has criticised the UK government over its tax policies and suggested that the UK wouldn't be an interesting investment destination for international companies. At that point, the UK government didn't seem minded to want to get involved in a war of words with Elon Musk. But today, as you were setting out with those words from Andrew Gwynn and from the Health Secretary Wes Streeting, it appears that the government has made a decision that it can't just let Elon Musk criticise the UK government online without some kind of response coming from the government. So it appears that Number 10 Downing Street has decided that at this point they have had to hit back. But they have to handle this very carefully, as I say, given that Elon Musk looks set to be an important part of the incoming Trump administration.
Yes, indeed, Olly. Olly Barrat joining us there from London. Thank you very much for your insights this evening. Now let's take a look at some other news stories from around the world. The cut-off of Russian gas supplies to a breakaway region in Moldova has forced the closure of all industrial companies except for food producers. Flows of Russian gas via Ukraine, which supplied Central and Eastern Europe, were halted at the end of 2024 as Kyiv rejected doing further business with Moscow. Ukraine had allowed Russia to keep pumping gas across its territory despite nearly 3 years of war. President Zelensky has described the end of Russian gas transit as one of Moscow's biggest defeats. Now, several Brazilian Air Force investigators are analysing data from the Azerbaijani airliner that crashed on Christmas, resulting in 38 deaths. Azerbaijan claims the jet was unintentionally shot down by Russia. The Imbara aircraft, which was made in Brazil, was en route from Baku to Grozny when it was diverted. It crashed while trying to land near the city of Aktu after flying hundreds of kilometers east across the Caspian Sea. Due to the subdued economic outlook, the number of unemployed people in Germany is expected to continue to rise this year and hit the 3 million mark for the first time in 10 years. The number of people out of work increased by 10,000 to nearly 2.9 million. Analysts polled by Reuters had expected that figure to rise by 15,000. The Labour Office said it's not all gloom and doom, as Germany has the fourth lowest unemployment rate in the EU with a rate of 3.4%. Major airports in Germany were hit by a nationwide IT outage affecting police systems at border control today. The outage caused a string of queues at border control at several German airports, including Frankfurt, the country's busiest airport. The regional public broadcaster reported that passengers were waiting for 2 hours at immigration while others kept being kept on the plane. Now, a huge red-hot object fell from the sky in a Kenyan village. A metallic object weighing about 500 kilos and measuring about 2 meters in diameter crashed in Makuku village. According to the Kenya Space Agency assessments, they suggest that this object is a separation ring from a rocket's launch vehicle. Now, for our top news stories today, Luke Littler has beaten Stephen Bunting to book his place in the final of the World Darts Championship. The 17-year-old was favourite to progress to the final for a second year running and swept Bunting aside, winning 6-1 at Alexandra Palace in London. He will face three-time champion Michael van Gerwen for the title tonight. A win for Luke Littler would make him the youngest world champion in the sport ever. And Novak Djokovic has crashed out of the Brisbane International in a shock defeat. The top seed lost to Riley Oplenka, who is ranked 293rd in the world in straight sets. Meanwhile, the 24 Grand Slam winner Djokovic will now shift his focus to winning an 11th Australian Open title under his new coach Andy Murray, and that will happen later this month. A reminder of our top stories. Impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol has survived another day outside prison walls. Investigators abandoned their attempt to arrest him, citing safety concerns. The foreign ministers of Germany and France are in Damascus meeting with the new Syrian leader as terrorism climbs to the top of the list for Western countries. And Elon Musk is slamming UK lawmakers over child grooming gang scandals, and in response he's been told to mind his own business. And that's all from us on W News this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Hadley Gamble, she's coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. Good night and have a lovely Friday evening.